Welcome to The Game Changers, a regular interview series in which we sit down with a fearless leader from the world of creativity. I'm Gareth Moss, founder of international executive search firm The Blueprint. We deliver transformation by placing progressive leaders. Today's game changer is Nick Law, Global Lead for Design and Creative Tech at Accenture Song. Hi, Nick.
Hi, Gareth. How are you?
I'm very good. How are you getting on?
Good.
Good. 20 years ago, Nick was hired by Bob Greenberg to shape what would become the world's most pioneering creative agency, RGA. Well known for iterating the agency model, Nick then moved from RGA, the agency, to Publicis, the network, to Apple, in-house, and now Accenture Song, the consultancy. So let's start, Nick, with a big question. Is there a rosy future ahead for each of these types, or do you feel one will sit on the throne?
Well, the one that is a little bit different is obviously Apple, because that's client side.
Yeah.
And you're more like a service within the business as opposed to the business.
Yeah.
So I think that if I was to start with what the future of in-house client side of marketing design looks like, that all depends on the company.
Yeah.
You know, it's very difficult to talk about client side positions without being specific to the sort of business it is and the relationship that business has with creativity and design. As it happens,
yeah,
Apple has always had a pretty sophisticated understanding of design and creativity. So I think that's the future of that is pretty healthy. I think there are some instances where it's better actually for a client to go outside for those sorts of services. For location, culture, whatever they may not be a good alignment. So that's a more complicated answer.
And so on that, Nick, as well, for instance, with Apple, because obviously Apple has the in-house model, you know, you help to build it there, but it still works with agencies, you know, like, well, Media Arts Lab, obviously like Elephant, etc. Do you still feel then there is the plan for agency? You think that's important to your point as well? Do you ever think Apple will be solely in-house, or do you think they'll always work with those agency partners?
I don't think so. I think Tor would agree.
Yep.
Yeah, I think that relationship is long and healthy and trusted. So I think that a collection of agencies where that's the case. So yeah, I think that's probably true.
Yeah.
Now, of course, RGA was a part of a holding company, but if I was to look at a discrete agency as opposed to a collection of agencies, of course there'll always be agencies. The big question there is what they're going to look like.
Yeah.
I think that the big difference between maybe the model from, you know, the 80s and before the advent of the internet is that you could have a more singular model and still have a lot of effect on your client. I think now, just because we're in this sort of connected world and because everything's sort of fragmented and moving very quickly, I think it's difficult to do one thing without being a boutique. So if you claim to sort of be able to steer a brand or help a client with more than just you know, a sort of production relationship, then I think you need to have a selection of capabilities. You know, they're pretty broad and connected.
Yeah,
that was the RGA model. We used to call it the house model, but I think that's and I think that's also answers the holding company question. Yeah. That's what holding companies are trying to do. They're trying to connect a bunch of different agencies in ways that are sort of integrated and useful for clients. It's a difficult thing to do because a lot of these agencies have strong individual cultures. They have overlapping capabilities. There's definitely, I think, a sort of cultural gap between the art and the science of our business right now. So that's the challenges there. The holding companies, I think, need to be reinvented, perhaps a lot more than they did 10 years ago.
Right.
10 years acceleration of change and everything has meant that's definitely. And then I think I think Accenture is a bit of a mix of those models. It obviously has this consulting and big tech background, and Song is a piece of that, which is the sort of Song is the customer facing part of Accenture, right? So that's why it's the creative part. That's why the agencies and the design parts are there. And, you know, I mean, I'm obviously going to be bullish on that model because I think it solves for more problems upstream. But every model has its challenges. Every model has to continually change and go through the pain of change. Yeah.
But and on that, you know, obviously with you coming to Accenture Song now, you know, what do you feel? Because obviously, you know, you have this history in iterating these different types of model. What do you think is the one biggest challenge in unifying a consultancy model with an agency model?
The challenge, I think, for any company that is so deeply ingrained in the businesses that it serves, which is Accenture, I think is just solving for complexity.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
You can't avoid complexity. You understand that you need to wrangle it, but somehow you've got to solve for it because that's the biggest impediment internally and externally. It's just dealing with that complexity. It's not getting simpler. Nothing's getting simpler. You know, we're talking about the metaverse being a huge opportunity, or the collection of different you know, web technologies that are being built right now. That doesn't mean that existing technologies are going to disappear. You know, this is a podcast. It's a lot like a radio, right?
Yeah,
I mean,
exactly.
formats tend to live on and find their place, you know, in the sort of ecosystem. But you know, we're just going to add more complexity. So if your job is to help customers, you know, interact with companies, then you've got to solve for that complexity with some sort of, yeah.
So the answer is simplification then, just to keep it as simple as possible.
Yes, I mean, I keep talking about this thing called deep simplicity.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And it's purposely sort of has two contrasting words because you can't solve the simplicity unless you understand the complexity. So that's the deep bit. So, you know, there's also superficial simplicity where you haven't understood the complexity of the problem. And so you come up with something that might be simple, but it just doesn't serve the person at the end. So it is a sort of, that's why you need, you know, in the language I used to use at RGA, you need deep systematic minds to understand the shape of the problem, and then you need you know, storytellers and great designers who are subtractive thinkers and make choices to make something simple for the thing that the customer sees, right?
So Nick, as well, how do you feel, obviously, with you joining Accenture Song, and they've got a kind of dream team globally in terms of the leadership as well there. How do you think Accenture Song is really kind of changing the game then within our industry?
So the power of the model is that there are so many pieces that can be assembled and reassembled in different ways that you can solve almost any problem. And also you're talking to different stakeholders on the client side that represent those different problems. But if you see the world as a particular, if you see the environment that our clients are trying to deal with in a particular way, and all of the capabilities that you're assembling help to solve for that world, then it makes sense for a client to start connecting those capabilities in a way that solves for the problem, right? Because you know a client, and when I say a client, I'm not just talking about a CMO. I'm talking about a CTO, a CEO. You know, there's a whole suite of leaders on the client side that need services, and more and more those services need to be sort of connected in ways that you know that create that simplicity. By the way, you know, from internally and externally. So I think that's the promise of Accenture, is that you've got this broad set of capabilities that can be connected in a powerful way. And, you know, we have the three S's, we call it, you know, for Song, is see, solve, simplify. And the C part is understand that complexity across every part of a business, the supply chain, you know, sustainability, you know, into all the sort of internal back office stuff and the front office stuff, and how you communicate with and interact with your customer. There's a whole bunch of things that you need to sort of connect together and understand, and that's the C bit. The solve is like you know, to do any sort of innovation and understand how to build on an existing industry and solve problems for an existing industry. You've got to understand that industry. You've got a depth of industry expertise, a depth of technical expertise, and we just have those people. And then, you know, the simplify is the thing you put out in the world that hopefully, you know, is interacting in a human way with customers. So you know, that seesaw simplify construct is in one way it's how we engage this sort of dizzying breadth of expertise to solve any problem.
Yeah,
that's the thing. It's astonishing, right? I know I enjoy the agency world, the design and the storytelling world, but you're solving a very specific problem with communications that maybe is just a part of what Accenture does. Yeah.
Do you think the main difference, I suppose, between the agency and the consultancy is that you know, consultancies solve problems, whereas agencies solve briefs? You know,
That's a pithy way to say it, Gareth. It's very poetic of you.
Right. Thank you.
I think that's right. Now, you know, in the end, the thing that I like about the agency world, you know, it was born out of creative people making stuff, you know, to help. So there's a strong instinct to create for creativity. You know, it was one of the reasons that when I was still in the agency world, one of the things I talked a lot about was I think that creatives should run businesses. You know, though there is a subset of creatives that are actually pretty good at have started businesses, run businesses, and it's a big reason I went to Accenture is because David Droga is a creative, and so in my mind, for the stuff that we do, he's the product guy. Mm-hmm. You know, Steve Jobs used to talk about this all the time when he came back to Apple. He sort of bemoaned the leadership, you know, that he replaced when he came back as not being product people. They didn't understand the product. So I think it's important to have creative people in charge. That's the opportunity, I think, for the agency world.
Yeah.
To have more creatives be more, you know, more in leadership positions as opposed to operations and finance. You need that.
Yeah.
But I think it's a partnership, and the partnership has been lost, I think, in a lot of the agencies that were actually created, that was founded by creatives. You know, so anyway, so having David, to me, it's richly ironic that Accenture, that most people wouldn't consider creative, has someone like David in as CEO of Song.
Leader. Yeah, I think that's made all the difference, hasn't it? Having a creative leader in charge of a consultancy like that.
Yeah, no, I agree.
And so obviously during the pandemic as well, you know, change has really accelerated. You know, is there one piece of advice that you would give to agencies, you know, that we're looking to adapt? Is the one thing, is that simplicity, or is there a certain kind of path they should go down?
I think this is a hard thing for a lot of agencies, is because they were built on such a perfect sort of burn back structure, and because they're being hired for that structure, you know, and for that output.
Yeah.
To change is difficult because you have to actually. I've always said this, change is a design problem. It's not another page in the back of your creds deck saying that we're now digital or whatever, you know, which is, you know, and to me, that the best way to distinguish an agency's capabilities is to look at the leadership, you know, and the surprising thing to me is that the leadership of a lot of the creative agencies in the last 10 years has remained pretty much the same sort of person.
Yeah.
Very talented storytellers, right? Mm-hmm. Which you need great talented storytellers, but you can't then go to a client and say, well, we understand digital and design and all these things, because somehow we've nested those capabilities underneath our leadership when our leadership doesn't understand them. It's like you need to have a symmetry of what you create at the top, and so you've got to understand that it's a dynamic environment. It's only changing more and more. So you need flexible structures, and you need leaders that represent the things you want to make. You know, don't just think you're going to hire a few crazy kids that understand the metaverse and you'll figure it out. It's not going to happen.
Yeah. And on that, Nick, so, you know, what is most important when you are hiring that leader or that kind of game changer? Like if someone was to lead an agency, what would you really be looking for?
Well, I'm a big fan of leadership teams.
Yeah.
So I think that the sort of day of the fearless, especially creative leader that claims to have mastery over all of the things that that an agency makes. Those days are over. And you know, so having this sort of balance between storytelling and design, I think, is important, because typically great designers are not great storytellers, and great storytellers aren't great designers. So if you can have a leadership team made up of those two creative sensibilities, then you have a breadth of literacy across all the things you need to assemble underneath, and it creates more flexibility.
Yeah.
Like, rather than having an atomic team, so that the structure that doesn't serve for this is one where you've got an ECD, and then art director, copywriter teams, 20 of them, and then a bunch of departments, the social department, the programmatic department. Like, that doesn't work, because when you get a problem, an ECD who may be a really great writer or art director will brief like 3 art director, copywriter teams. They'll go and spin up some narrative ideas, because that's what they're designed to do. And then by the time an idea is selected, that's when they start engaging all the capabilities that are more dimensional than a story. And so the idea is, it's hammering a square peg into a round hole by the time you get down there. Whereas if you have the leadership, a breadth of literacy at leadership level, not only will you understand how to solve for any idiosyncratic brief, but you'll be able to curate a team underneath. So have more flexible team structures and more and a more sort of atomic leadership team. That's what I think works better, because then you can assemble and reassemble teams constantly. Instead of trying to force a problem through the old burnback team.
Yeah. And then, so you're known for iterating new models and diversifying capabilities. What's your perspective on how agencies can diversify their people to address inequality?
I think it's interesting. I think there's more opportunity if you're a modern agency to have a diverse group of people working there, because you're trying to find people from industries that haven't been built.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
What I found is that the more mature capabilities, like copywriting, for example, which is a time-honored skill set and has universities and education systems that are pretty mature, you tend to get people look the same, and so you've got to look elsewhere. And when you're building a new capability, I remember in the early days of RGA, the most diverse group was interaction design.
Yeah,
because we were getting interaction designers from everywhere. They were often visual designers. They were coming from architecture. They're coming from these new schools like Carnegie Mellon and ITP, and so you just had a broader and more interesting set of places to pull people from, because it hadn't matured to a point where it had calcified. So I mean, now that doesn't mean that when you build capabilities that are more mature, that you should just sort of get the old white guys or the people from the more established schools. You just need to be more imaginative there. But you just have more opportunity, I think, to find talent. And then, of course, everyone knows this, and I'm not the first person to make this observation. You can bring in all sorts of different people, but again, if the leadership isn't as diverse, then it's difficult to keep people. So identifying talent, and in many cases, it's not even identifying potential, because there are often really good people doing really great work who are just not, especially in big companies, who people just haven't recognized yet. So it's just as much about recognition as mentorship too.
Brilliant. Okay, Nick Law, thank you for being a game changer.
Thank you, Gareth. I appreciate it.
Cheers.